Hi everyone, and welcome back to our series on tools and techniques within D&D. Hope you've been enjoying it, and we're on to a new one today, which is really 5 things that can go wrong in a session. So let's jump into it. What's number one? Insufficient preparation. So this can really take two different types of states. One is that if you're running a third-party module or something that someone else has written, you haven't read it well enough, and you've got some issues there in terms of lack of knowledge. So always when you're sort of looking at third-party stuff, it's actually quite hard because you really do need to immerse yourself in the material and kind of understand where the author's going with all of that. So that's number one. Um, if you're doing your own stuff, you're doing your homebrew, you're writing your own stuff, sometimes you might have insufficient material for your session. Now, there's probably a couple of ways of getting around this. One is that knowing your play group is probably a really good thing because you kind of know what they get through in a session, how fast they play, how much they role play as opposed to combat. So that's really kind of important. But with homebrew, always have a few things stuck on the side as random encounters or something like that to pad it out if you are sort of running a little bit late or a little bit low, I should say, on your material. One we've actually talked about in some of the other videos is lack of safety tools. Now, if you're playing with your home group and you've played for ages like we have, you don't really need to bother about some of these. But if you are playing with new people, and look, even if you're playing with older people, it's probably good because people get triggered by different things. So again, maybe talking about the themes that you're passing through in this particular scenario that you're playing. It could be dark fantasy, it could be horror, it could be anything. Some of those things might trigger people. Um, having your X card, so having your pause or your stop without any judgment to let your players go, hang on a tick, I'm not comfortable with where this is going. So that's actually quite important. And again, going back to session zero, setting the tone for how you want this game to go, get into a common agreement with your players about how that's actually going to work. Don't want to labour that, but you'll see plenty of videos around how to do that, and we may do one later. Number three, players doing unexpected things. Um, one thing about this game, which is different to virtually all other games, role playing provides you the freedom to do things. There are no constraints, as in with a computer-based game or a board game or something like that. So what can you do? Now, you've really only got two choices if your players sort of run off. One, you can roll with it. So if your players go off somewhere where you hadn't expected them to go in your own world or somewhere different, roll with it. It might open up a new story thread or something that could actually be quite interesting for them to sort of go through. The second is sort of gradually try to bring them back on track. One of the ways that I find which is interesting to do that is sometimes if I'm designing a session or designing a one shot or something like that, I will have a series of encounters, but I won't necessarily dictate where those encounters take place. I'll have a sort of generic one so that if they do go off in another direction, you can still say play an encounter which is central or peripheral to your plot, but still get that benefit out of it while giving the illusion, in this particular case, of agency to the players about what they're doing and where they're going. So that's kind of something that you want to do with it as well too. Tip 4, scenario pacing and choice. Two things here, too fast, too slow. Sometimes, and again, this might come back to your play style or your DMing style. Sometimes you need to get your pacing right. So I tend to probably overwrite stuff when I do things. And I'll try to judge whether the players are sort of starting to go, oh, here he goes again, big long descriptions about stuff. And truncate that if possible. Sometimes you try to push your players through to do various things and it might be going too fast for them. They might be going, hang on a tick, I want to get my head around what we're trying to do here. So one of the skills as a DM is really to sort of try to judge your player's response to the pacing of your module or your scenario and adjust it accordingly. Sometimes you might need to actually drop encounters, and that's really hard for a GM because you kind of like all your encounters if you design them that way. But sometimes if you are trying to say, for example, do a one shot, drop the encounter, adjust, do things to maintain that pace and the enjoyment for everyone involved. Lastly, we've left the best to last here. And this is really the most difficult thing that any DM has to cope with, and that's disruptive players. Players who maybe are doing things at odds to the rest of the party, players who claim this is what my character would do, and then start to do things to either wreck the scenario or wreck the enjoyment of people playing it. It is probably the most common and most difficult one to address. So let's go through maybe 5 things which you can do. Session 0. If you think you've got a disruptive player, have a session 0. And at session 0, you need to state out what your expectations are of running the game and what your players' expectations are. So if something goes wrong during a session, you can sort of press pause and just go, hang on a sec, I thought we agreed that we would play like X rather than this, and this is kind of against that. So it sort of draws them back to that sort of implied or implicit agreement that you have with the session 0. If that doesn't work, sometimes you might have players which disagree and maybe get a little bit heated about what their characters are doing. So you might actually have to mediate that as a GM and go, well, hang on a sec, well, this is what you're trying to do. This is what you're trying to do. Is this a goal displacement sort of thing? Is this a personality thing? And try to mediate between the players to sort of move stuff forward. That does happen a bit, especially in groups which are maybe blended when you introduce new people into an existing playing group, or you've just got new people as well too. So something to be a little bit aware of. If possible, take it offline. If you have a problem with one of your players, you can just sit there and go, look, maybe we need to talk about this later. Maybe we need to talk about it afterwards, but don't kind of do it in session. Sort of go through your session, wrap up your session, then maybe talk to your player offline. There might be a genuine beef that they have with you, or something you're doing, or something they want to do with their character. So talk it out. Really try to work through that with them, because again, you're playing with your players, not against your players as such. Then you kind of have distracted players. This does happen a lot as well too, where especially in larger play groups or larger parties, where you might have above 6 type of people, you might have some people which dominate that type of play, and someone might be sitting back looking at their phone, or heavens forbid, reading a book or something else, and just not contributing. So how do you deal with that? When you're running encounters, I find explicitly going through and asking your players what they're doing in their initiative order or prior to the actual round starting sort of draws them in, like, what specifically are you doing? And if they're sort of like, I don't know, give them some hints, give them some tips. Start to actually role play more directly with them as the GM. Try to sort of draw them in. It might be that they actually don't like what you're playing, and that could be the scenario, it could be your style, it could be the story, it could be their character. So it might be something that sort of at the end of the session you might talk to someone and go, hey, look, you kind of disengaged a bit. Are you enjoying it? And maybe they're just a quieter player who likes to watch the story unfold. And if that's the case, then there's no real problem there. But they might actually just not feel a sense of agency in that. So that's kind of important as well. The last really is when you've sort of exhausted all of those things and it's not going to work, you could red card someone. So it's basically like, okay, so you're really being disruptive. Red card. So maybe you take a break. Maybe make the person step out for 5-10 minutes or something. Maybe take a break in total and just go, hey, I think things are getting a bit heated here. Maybe we'll just have a cup of coffee, have a tea, have a drink, whatever turns you on. The ultimate of all of that is sometimes you get to a point where there is a person who will just not conform with the group norms, who just will not want to play their way regardless of how it is, and that's not going to work. And ultimately that's expulsion. So you'll need to do that gently and just go, hey, look, this is not working for either of us and it's not working for the group. So maybe, we need to think about looking at another group, maybe playing somewhere else, doing something else, maybe splitting the group, doing whatever. But that would be the last case. So sorry to end on a bit of a downer there, but it does happen. And disruptive players are something as a GM you need to learn to deal with. So anyway, as always, we've got the tools and the notes up on our Google Drive. So if you need to refer back, please do. Otherwise, enjoy playing. Peace.